Hi guys, I'm Maylene Dovan, certified athletic therapist and founder of Rehab-U Movement and Performance Therapy. Welcome to our YouTube channel. This week we're talking about returning to the bench press after injury, late phase rehab, okay? And I'm gonna talk about a specific case that I had where I had a client who came to me who was a power lifter who had had an injury to her shoulder during the bench press. Her injury was or happened at the bottom of the bench press, and she had anterior glenohumeral instability. So you can imagine that paints the picture of the bottom of the bench press would be a very vulnerable position. Before we even got to what we're going to go through today, we went through a full process of stabilizing the shoulder, doing everything we needed to do to kind of gain some stability in that shoulder. And we kept the bench press in her training as much as we could. And that's really important for an athlete like a power lifter, where they're training those 3 barbell exercises really specifically, and they want to stay there as much as they can. So even when you've got an athlete like that who's injured, you want to keep them as close to their threshold of performance as possible. So you want to keep them doing those lifts as much as you can. Hey guys, thanks for watching our videos, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. She had had the injury initially because she touched down a little too high on the chest, and she felt something give, but she was someone who was generally very hypermobile. So in order to keep her bench pressing, we kept her bench pressing in the ranges that she was comfortable with, meaning when she was bench pressing a little bit heavier, she was doing it in a shortened range of motion, so avoiding that vulnerable position. And we could have her benching full range of motion with lighter weights and using more slow and controlled repetitions. So playing around with how those reps were performed. As we got to later and later in her rehab process, we start to want to build on creating intensity and stressing that shoulder joint in that vulnerable position. We need to get her back to that where she can touch down on the chest, come to a full stop, and press from there. So you got to think about, she's going to be in that vulnerable range of motion. We want to create strength there at that specific part of the range of motion. And she's always going to be doing single reps, and she's always going to have to touch down and stop at the chest, right? So those are all the things that you want to keep in mind as you progress her back. Now, the method I want to talk about today that we used with her to get her back into performance is a method that you can manipulate fairly early on in the rehab process. If you play with the range of motion, probably even earlier. We're going to focus on that full range. And that method that I'm talking about is clusters. Now, the cluster method allows you to have intensity. You've heard me say before that intensity is very important in rehab, right? A lot of the times we're chasing fixing stuff and we're not doing enough intensity, so we're not creating physiological adaptations. And intensity is even more important when you're working with an athlete who works at an intense level. So those are things that we really need to keep in mind. The other advantage of clusters is it allows you to work with intensity, but also with some volume, because saying intensity is important is not to say that volume isn't important as well. But we tend to see them as it's more intense, I'm gonna have less volume. It's less intense, I'm gonna have more volume. Cluster allows you to play around with those things, and you can manipulate it from earlier on in the rehab process to much later in the rehab process. We're going to look at 3 ways in which we did that for this specific client. First off, what is a cluster? Cluster involves alternating reps with rest intervals within one set. So instead of doing consecutive reps, you're doing one or sometimes some consecutive reps, but with a rest interval. So if, for example, we were having Pierre-Luc do 3 cluster reps, he would do 1 rep and actually re-rack the bar and take a 10 to 15 second break in this case, and then do another rep. So it would look like this. He's going to do 1 full rep, and he's actually going to rack the bar. So he's not holding the bar at the top, he's actually re-racking the bar, resting completely, 10 to 15 seconds based on what we've given him, and then unracks again and does another rep. And he will rest again. And then he would do another 15-second rest and do a 3rd rep. And if we were having him do 3 reps, that's his 1 set, okay? So instead of 3 consecutive reps, he's done 3 reps with a rest interval in between. Now what that allows you to do, the rest interval just allows you to reset technically. It also allows enough rest for the nervous system to do another rep. So typically he'll be able to do 3 reps with more than what his actual 3 RM would be, with more than what he would be able to do in 3 consecutive reps. So that's where clusters allow you to work with intensity and more volume. So you're lifting that heavier weight more times than you would with a classic set of consecutive reps. So what we did with this specific client of mine is initially, when we were able to get her bench pressing relatively heavy in that vulnerable range of motion, we started by giving her a cluster set where she would do 3 consecutive reps, then she would rack the bar, then she would do 15 seconds later another rep, rack the bar again, and then do another rep. So she was doing 3 plus 1 plus 1. Now we weren't so much concerned initially with the weight on this. We just wanted her to work with the maximum weight she was kind of comfortable with at that point to do the 3 reps, okay? So it looks like this. So we have 3 consecutive reps. Notice, I'm gonna wait till he racks. So notice on his 3 consecutive reps, full stop on the chest, and then a fast concentric. 15 seconds rest, 1 rep, and repeat after another 15 seconds rest. One rep. Good. Later on in when she was getting comfortable with this, so this type of cluster allowed her to kind of start to move around heavier weights in that vulnerable position, the one that she had gotten injured in, the one that was apprehensive because of her injury. So we get her comfortable in that position with some heavier weights, and then we kind of progress her from there. So then we had her doing the classic kind of cluster you'll see, which is 5 reps with 10 to 15 seconds between each rep. So this gives us 5 reps, but now specifically in those 5 reps, she's using about her 3 or 4 RM. So she's actually doing 5 repetitions with what she would only be able to do 3 to 4 repetitions if she were to do consecutive rests. So more intensity and more volume. Single reps are an important point here as well, because remember, she's a power lifter. So the setup, doing the single rep is important as well for her. So again, it would look like the example we gave earlier. So 1 rep, full stop on the chest, fast concentric, rack the barbell. Now, one thing I want to mention, and you know, it's 10-15 seconds and then another rep, 10-15 seconds, another rep, 4-5 reps. One thing I want to mention, a mistake that people make sometimes on clusters, is they don't finish their rep before they rack the barbell. So Pierre-Luc is going to show us, the person will actually do their rep, stop at the chest, but then when they come up, because they know they're racking the barbell, they put it right back on the racks, right? So that's a mistake that you want to avoid. It's an actual single rep, and then you rack the barbell. Third progression that we had for her is just to kind of progress this. So then we did 5 reps with about her 3-4 RM. Now we can increase that intensity a little bit more. So we can have her doing, for example, again, another 5 reps, but using now her 2 to 3 RM, but now we're gonna increase that range rest interval between the reps. So now instead of resting 10 to 15 seconds between each rep, she'll rest 20 to 30 seconds between each rep. So she's still doing 5 reps, but because the rest is longer, she's lifting more weight. So again, we've kept the volume, but we've increased the intensity, and we've been able to manage that by having the rest interval in between. So we're not going to show you that here because it looks the same. Single rep, full rep, then rack the barbell, wait, rest the 20 to 30 seconds, and then do another rep and do that for 5 single reps. That's how we can use a method like clusters in the rehab process when we want to start to introduce more intensity, but not to say that volume isn't important. Why I gave you the specific example of a power lifter is having that volume is going to be important generally in the rehab process. Clusters allows you to have intensity and volume, and for someone like a power lifter where she's going to be working at high intensity but always working single reps, it's just a method that really fits. There are other methods that she used in the rest of her training when she was back to training with her powerlifting coach, but this is how we kind of got her back, brought her as close to performance as we could before really returning her from her rehab. So putting a final loop to her rehab periodization. So again, I always say that the most important thing that's usually missing in rehab periodization, the most important thing that's missing in the toolbox of many therapists and trainers to who I teach, is understanding these different methods, understanding these different rep schemes so that you can decide where you're increasing the intensity, how you're doing it, how you're setting it up, what you're targeting specifically as far as range of motion. All these little things you can analyze, make critical choices on which method am I going to use, or which type of rep scheme am I going to use, where, why is this important for this person, why is this creating intensity for this person outside of just the load that we're moving. So hopefully that helps you guys in your rehab periodization. Remember, the more tools in your toolbox, the more rehab is training. Thanks for watching the video. Hit like and subscribe, comment below if you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week.